They dragged him through the mud outside the checkpoint, blood on his teeth, ribs cracked under enforcer boots a euros, and still, he didn't regret a single second of it. 3 days earlier, nobody on that colony knew his name. Now the whole station was whispering it like a prayer. He'd broken the one law that got a man executed on sight just to save a 5-year-old girl nobody else dared touch. These enforcers thought they were finishing the story right there in the mud. They had no idea. Something was already burning toward this planet. And it wasn't stopping for anyone. Meridian Station was the place. It was a warning. 6 years under Korath occupation had taught every human on that rock the same lesson. Keep your head down, follow the curfew, and never under any circumstances interfere with enforcer business. Break that rule, and you didn't get a fine. You got a public example made out of you. Ethan Cole had followed that rule better than anyone. For 2 years he'd worked the recycling docks on the lower ring, said nothing, asked nothing, kept his eyes on his boots whenever a Korath patrol walked by. Folks on the station knew him as the quiet guy, the one who fixed busted generators for food credits and never stuck around to talk. Nobody knew where he came from before the occupation. Nobody asked. Around here, questions like that got people disappeared. But Ethan wasn't just quiet. He was watching, cataloging, counting patrol rotations, guard shift changes, weak points in the perimeter fencing. A Euro-old habits that never really left a man, no matter how many years he tried to bury them under grease-stained coveralls and a fake last name. That night, the curfew sirens hit at 2100 sharp, same as always. Doors locked, lights dimmed. The station went dead silent, the kind of silence that pressed on your chest. Except for one sound, a little girl crying. Alone in the collapsed section of Sector 7 a euros, the part of the station the Korath had condemned after a structural fire and never bothered to clear out. Her name was Lily, 6 years old. Her mother worked the night shift and hadn't made it home before lockdown, and Lily had gone looking for her, straight into a zone that was about to be purged by an automated containment strike a euros, a controlled burn. The Korath ran twice a month to keep the wreckage from spreading. Ethan heard her from 3 corridors away. Everyone else heard her too. Doors stayed shut, curtains stayed drawn. Because everybody on that station had learned the same brutal math. One little girl's life wasn't worth an entire family's execution. Everybody, except him. He was already moving before he'd even decided to. Boots hitting the deck plating, heart slamming against his ribs, straight toward the one place on Meridian Station where the rules said no human was supposed to go. He didn't know yet that this single decision was about to change everything a euros, not just for him, not just for Lily, but for every human being on that colony. Sector 7 looked like something had chewed it up and spit it back out. Twisted beams, scorched walls, emergency lighting flickering red like a heartbeat about to give out. Ethan moved through it fast, low, the way he used to move a long time ago in a life he never talked about. Lily. He kept his voice just above a whisper. Yelling would bring drones. Lily, sweetheart, where are you? A whimper answered him from behind a collapsed support strut. He found her curled up small, knees to her chest, face streaked with dust and tears. One arm scraped raw from crawling through the wreckage looking for her mom. Hey! Hey, it's okay. He crouched down, kept his hands where she could see them, kept his voice soft the way you'd talk to a spooked animal. I'm gonna get you out of here. I promise. That's when the countdown chime kicked in overhead. 3 tones. The containment purge sequence. 4 minutes until Sector 7 got flash sterilized by a controlled thermal burn designed to torch every scrap of debris down to bare metal. Ethan didn't hesitate. He scooped Lily up, felt her tiny arms clamp around his neck like a vice, and he ran. Not toward the sector exit a euro that route was already sealing, blast doors grinding shut on schedule. He cut left instead, toward a maintenance shaft he'd mapped out months ago during one of his quiet little walks nobody thought twice about. The shaft was tight, hot, filled with dust that stung his eyes. Lily was crying again, and he kept talking to her the whole way, telling her some corny joke about a robot that couldn't dance, anything to keep her mind off the heat building behind them as the countdown ticked below 60 seconds. They hit the outer grate just as the first wave of thermal pressure rolled through the shaft behind them like a freight train. Ethan slammed his shoulder into the grate, felt it give, and threw them both through into the open corridor beyond a euros. Right as the purge went off with a dull, station-shaking roar, he lay there a second, Lily still clinging to him, both of them breathing hard, alive. Then the lights above them changed color. Red to blue. Enforcer alert, because leaving your quarters during curfew €1 for any reason €1 was the one rule on Meridian Station you didn't break twice. They came fast. 4 Korath enforcers, tall and armored, boots striking the deck in perfect unison, the kind of synchronized menace built to make humans feel small. Their commander, a broad-shouldered enforcer named Draven, didn't even bother drawing a weapon. He didn't need to. Curfew violation, Draven said, voice flat through the translator box on his chest plate. Alclid entry into a restricted zone. You know the penalty, human. Ethan set Lily down gently behind him, angling his body between her and the enforcers without even thinking about it. She was alone in there, about to get burned alive by your own purge cycle. I wasn't gonna just stand there. Not your concern. She's 6 years old, man. Something in Ethan's voice sharpened, an edge that hadn't come out of him in years. She's always gonna be my concern. Word travels fast on a station that small. By the time Draven's enforcers grabbed Ethan's arms, a crowd had already gathered along the upper walkway €, dozens of humans who normally wouldn't dare show their faces during a curfew violation, standing there anyway, watching. Lily's mother pushed through the crowd, screaming her daughter's name, and when she saw Lily alive and unhurt, she nearly collapsed with relief. Draven saw the crowd, saw the way they were looking at Ethan €, not with pity, but with something far more dangerous. Respect, that's when he decided to make it worse. Public correction, Draven ordered. Here, now. They threw Ethan to the deck plating, and the beating started right there in front of everyone. Boots and batons, message unmistakable. This is what happens when a human forgets his place. Even for a good reason, even for a child. Ethan didn't cry out, didn't beg. He just curled around the worst of the blows and kept his eyes open, kept looking at that crowd, at Lily crying in her mother's arms, and some part of him €, some old, buried part of €, thought, worth it, the crowd didn't scatter. They stood there and watched, fists clenched, faces hard, something shifting in the air that hadn't been there in 6 long years of occupation. Draven called it off before the boy stopped breathing €, barely. Left him broken on the deck as an example, but he'd made a mistake. Because somewhere in that crowd, someone had already pulled out a contraband long-range transmitter, and a message was already burning its way off Meridian Station, out past the occupied zone, aimed at a frequency the Korath didn't even know still existed, a frequency that belonged to Earth. Ethan woke up 3 days later in the colony's makeshift medbay, every breath feeling like broken glass in his chest. Dr. Nadia Reyes, one of the few medical staff the Korath still allowed to operate, sat beside his cot, arms crossed, studying him like a puzzle she was slowly putting together. You've got 4 cracked ribs, a fractured wrist, and internal bruising that should have put you in a coma, she said. But your vitals are stabilizing faster than anything I've ever seen. Faster than should be medically possible. Ethan just grunted, tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it. Who are you, Ethan? Reyes asked quietly. Because a recycling dock worker doesn't heal like this. And a recycling dock worker sure as hell doesn't move the way you moved through Sector 7. I pulled the corridor footage before enforcers wiped it. That wasn't luck, that was training. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. Then, finally, Ghost Division, Earth Special Operations. Before the occupation, before everything went sideways out here €, I was part of a unit that didn't officially exist. We got scattered when the Korath fleet hit the outer colonies. I ended up here. Figured the quietest life I could build was the safest one for everybody around me. Rise let out a slow breath. Well, quiet's over now, soldier. You've got no idea what's happening outside this room. She wasn't wrong. Colony Administrator Marcus Vance Euros, a tired, careful man who'd spent 6 years keeping his people alive through quiet compliance Euros, had watched the footage of Ethan shielding Lily, watched the beating, watched his own people standing their ground for the first time since the occupation began. And something in him had cracked open too. Vance had authorized that contraband transmission himself. A short burst message, encrypted, sent screaming across the black toward the last known Earth relay station, 3 jumps away. He didn't know if anyone would even receive it. He didn't know if Earth still had the strength to respond, after everything the Korath had taken from the outer colonies. But he'd sent it anyway. 4 words buried in the encrypted burst, words that would end up meaning everything Ghost Division member alive. Meridian Station, somewhere 3 jumps away. On a relay station Draven's people didn't even know still functioned. That message landed in the hands of someone who'd spent 6 years searching for exactly this kind of signal. and the response came back in under an hour. Commander Alina Voss hadn't slept properly in 6 years. Ever since the Korath fleet swept through the outer colonies and Earth's forces got pushed back to the core systems, she'd spent every waking hour hunting for survivors of the scattered Ghost Division units, Euro soldiers who'd vanished into occupied territory, presumed dead, presumed lost. When the message from Meridian Station hit her console, she read it 4 times before she let herself believe it Ghost Division member alive. She pulled the ID cross-reference in under a minute. Ethan Cole. Sergeant First Class. Ghost Division, Unit 12. Reported missing in action during the Meridian evacuation 6 years ago, along with the rest of his unit, presumed dead. Case closed. Except he wasn't dead. He was alive on an occupied colony, and according to the footage attached to that burst transmission, he'd just taken a public beating in front of an entire station to save a 6-year-old girl from a Korath containment purge. Voss stood up from her console so fast her chair spun out behind her. "Get me Fleet Command," she said. Now. Back on Meridian Station, Draven had no idea what he'd just set in motion. As far as he was concerned, the situation was handled a human made an example of, order restored, business as usual. He filed his report, resumed patrol rotations, and gave the incident no further thought. That was Draven's second mistake, because Earth Command hadn't forgotten about the outer colonies. They just hadn't had a reason strong enough or a target precise enough to justify the risk of a strike that deep into occupied territory. 6 years of careful, quiet planning, 6 years of building a response fleet designed specifically for exactly this kind of extraction, waiting for the right signal. Ethan Cole, broken ribs and all, had just become that signal. Fleet Command authorized Operation Homecoming within 4 hours of receiving Voss's report. A strike fleet, small but devastating, built around technology and tactics the Korath had never once encountered from Earth forces because Earth had spent 6 years of occupation learning, adapting, and preparing, quietly, patiently, for the day they'd finally get a reason to hit back. Voss took personal command of the lead vessel. Before she gave the launch order, she pulled up Ethan's service file one more time, looked at the photo of a younger soldier who hadn't yet learned to hide behind grease-stained coveralls and a fake name. "Hang in there, Cole," she muttered. "We're coming." 3 jumps out. 72 hours to Meridian Station. Word spread through Meridian Station the way water finds every crack in a wall quiet, unstoppable, impossible to fully contain. Nobody knew exactly what had happened, but everybody knew something had changed. The quiet dock worker who'd saved Lily wasn't just some brave fool. He was something more. And Administrator Vance, usually so careful with what he let slip, couldn't quite keep the hope out of his eyes anymore. Draven felt it too, that shift in the air, and it made him nervous in a way 6 years of easy occupation never had. Enforcer patrols doubled, curfew got stricter. And when Draven learned through channels even he wasn't supposed to have that a contraband transmission had gone out the night of Ethan's beating, he made a decision that would define everything that came next. Public execution, he announced to his Enforcer command staff. 3 days from now. The human who broke curfew. Let it be a lesson this colony never forgets. Ethan, still healing in the medbay, heard the announcement over the station's forced broadcast system. Draven's translated voice cold and flat, echoing through every corridor on Meridian Station. Reyes went pale. Vance, sitting at Ethan's bedside, looked like a man watching his careful, quiet world collapse in real time. But Ethan just closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. 3 days, he said. That's enough time. Enough time for what? Reyes asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he thought about Voss, about the unit he used to run with, about 6 years of wondering if anyone back home even remembered Ghost Division existed. He thought about that burst transmission Vance had sent, and he allowed himself, for the first time in years, a small, dangerous flicker of hope. Enough time for the cavalry, he said quietly. Over the next 72 hours, something remarkable happened across Meridian Station. Families who'd spent 6 years keeping their heads down started talking to each other again really talking, not just the careful, guarded small talk of people afraid of being overheard. Lily's mother organized a quiet network of families who'd start passing supplies to Ethan's cell under Reyes's medical cover story. Dock workers started sabotaging Enforcer equipment in small, deniable ways. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would draw direct retaliation, just enough friction to slow Draven's forces down, buy a little more time. Nobody on that station knew for certain that help was coming. But they'd seen one man stand up when it mattered most, take the beating of his life, and never once regret it. And for the first time in 6 years, that was enough to make an entire colony start believing again. They marched Ethan out into the central plaza at dawn, wrists bound, ribs still wrapped tight under his shirt, every step sending fire through his chest. Draven had ordered every human on Meridian Station present for the execution a euro. Another lesson, another warning, delivered in the cruelest way he knew how. The plaza filled fast. Hundreds of colonists, packed shoulder to shoulder, faces tight with fear and something else, something Draven completely failed to recognize. Not submission. Defiance. Lily stood at the front with her mother, small hand gripping tight, watching the man who'd saved her life get marched toward a platform built specifically to end his. Draven took the podium himself, translator box amplifying his voice across the plaza. This human broke curfew, endangered station security, defied enforcer authority in front of witnesses. The penalty for such defiance are euros. He saved a little girl's life, someone shouted from the crowd. A dock worker, one of Ethan's old co-workers, voice shaking but steady. That's it. That's the whole crime. Draven's head snapped toward the voice. Silence. Nobody was silent. More voices rose up, scattered at first, then building, a rolling wave of 6 years of swallowed anger finally breaking loose. Draven's enforcers shifted uneasily, weapons raised, watching a crowd that had never once pushed back like this before. Up on the platform, Ethan looked out at all of them a euros, at Lily, at her mother, at Vance standing near the front with his jaw locked tight, at Reyes gripping the edge of the crowd barrier like she might climb over it herself. He thought about the 72 hours that had passed, about whether that message had even made it out, about whether help was actually coming, or whether this was simply how his story ended, on a platform, in front of people he'd only known a couple of years, but had somehow come to care about like family. Draven raised his hand, signaling the execution to proceed. And that's when the sky above Meridian Station tore open, not a single ship. A formation, sleek and silent, dropping out of a jump corridor with a precision that made every Korath sensor scream in unison. Draven's enforcers froze, weapons swinging skyward, confusion rippling through their ranks as alarms blared across the station. The crowd went dead silent, every face turned upward, watching those ships descend through Meridian's thin atmosphere. Like something out of a dream nobody had dared to have in 6 long years. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not from the broken ribs this time, but from something closer to hope. "Told you," he whispered, to nobody and everybody. "Cavalry's here." Commander Voss's lead ship hit atmosphere hot, engines screaming, and by the time it touched down at the edge of the plaza, Earth strike teams were already deploying a euros fast, coordinated, brutal in their efficiency. 6 years of preparation compressed into 90 seconds of controlled chaos. Draven's enforcers scrambled to respond, but they'd built their entire occupation around one core assumption: that Earth was broken, scattered, incapable of striking back this deep into held territory. That assumption died the second the first strike team hit the ground and started clearing enforcer positions with tactics the Korath had simply never trained against. Voss herself led the push toward the execution platform, cutting through enforcer resistance with a small team moving, like they'd rehearsed this exact scenario 100 times a euros, because they had, over and over, for 6 long years, waiting for exactly this moment. Draven, to his credit, didn't run. He turned to face the incoming strike team, weapon raised, still trying to process how his careful, quiet occupation had unraveled in less than 2 minutes. "Stand down," Voss ordered, her voice carrying across the plaza even without amplification. "This colony's under Earth protection as of right now. You can walk away from this, or you can be the example your own command uses to explain why you shouldn't have made an example out of one of my soldiers." For a long moment, nobody moved. The entire plaza held its breath a euro. Hundreds of colonists, Draven's remaining enforcers, Ethan still standing bound on that platform, Lily's small hand still locked in her mother's grip. Then Draven lowered his weapon, not out of mercy. Out of math. His forces were outmatched, outmaneuvered, and reinforcements were still hours out. He'd built 6 years of authority on the assumption that Earth would never come back for this colony. He'd been wrong. And now the entire plaza knew it. Voss's team swept up the platform steps and cut Ethan's restraints herself, steadying him as his legs nearly gave out from exhaustion and relief in equal measure. "Sergeant Cole," she said, a small, tired smile breaking through 6 years of careful military discipline. "Ghost Division's been looking for you a long time." Ethan looked past her, out at the crowd, at Lily being lifted onto her mother's shoulders to see over the sea of people, at Vance and Reyes pushing their way toward the platform, with tears they weren't bothering to hide anymore. "Guess I wasn't as lost as everybody thought," he said. Above them, more ships were already moving to secure the rest of the station. Earth's flag a sight nobody on Meridian had seen in 6 long years a visible on every hull. They took Draven into custody within the hour, along with what remained of his Enforcer command. He stood there in restraints of his own now, watching Earth strike teams methodically dismantle 6 years of occupation infrastructure with the same cold efficiency his own forces had once used to keep this colony in line. "I don't understand," Draven said, more to himself than to anyone else. "One human. You risked an entire strike fleet, this deep into contested space, for one human." Voss, standing nearby overseeing the transfer of Enforcer prisoners, actually laughed short, sharp, humorless. "You still don't get it, do you? This was never about one human." She gestured out at the plaza, at the colonists helping strike teams identify remaining enforced positions, at families embracing each other in the open for the first time in years without fear of being watched, at Lily running full speed across the plaza to wrap both arms around Ethan's legs while he knelt down to hug her properly for the first time since the containment purge. "You occupied this colony for 6 years," Voss continued, "because you figured Earth was too broken, too scattered, too beaten down to come back for it. You were wrong. All it took was one man deciding a little girl's life mattered more than his own safety. And word getting out that Earth still had people willing to fight for that kind of decision." Draven had no answer for that. In 6 years of running Meridian Station, he'd never once accounted for the possibility that the very trait he'd tried to beat out of these people that stubborn, reckless willingness to protect each other no matter the cost of was exactly the thing that would bring an entire fleet down on his head. Ethan stood up slowly, Lily still clinging to his side, and walked over to where Draven stood in restraints. The Enforcer straightened, expecting retaliation, maybe even hoping for it a clean ending to a situation he no longer understood. Instead, Ethan just looked at him for a long moment. "You had 6 years to learn something about us," Ethan said quietly. "And you never bothered to. That was always going to be your mistake, not mine." He turned and walked away, back toward Vance and Reyes and the rest of the colonists gathering near the platform, back toward the first real daylight this station had seen in 6 long years the kind that didn't come with a curfew attached. Behind him, Draven watched Earthships fill the sky above Meridian Station and understood, far too late, exactly what kind of mistake he'd made. 3 weeks later, Meridian Station looked almost unrecognizable. Earth engineers had moved in to repair what 6 years of occupation had worn down. Curfew sirens had been dismantled, piece by piece, and nobody missed the sound. Kids played openly in the plaza where an execution platform used to stand, and Lilia Euros, now the unofficial mascot of the entire liberation effort, spent most afternoons trailing after Ethan while he helped rebuild the very dock section where he used to work quietly, saying nothing, asking nothing, hiding from a past that had finally caught up with him in the best possible way. Commander Voss offered him a formal return to Ghost Division. Full reinstatement, rank and record restored. Ethan thought about it for exactly 1 evening before turning it down. "I appreciate it," he told her, standing on the newly repaired dock, watching Meridian's twin suns set over a horizon that finally belonged to its people again. "But I think I did enough soldiering for 1 lifetime. Figure I'll stick around here instead. Somebody's gotta keep fixing generators." Voss studied him for a long moment, then nodded, understanding something a lot of soldiers eventually learn that the fight isn't always about staying in uniform. Sometimes it's about staying where you're needed most. Vance took over as the colony's first freely elected administrator in 6 years. Reyes expanded the medbay into a full station hospital, and Lily's mother started teaching kids on the station history they hadn't been allowed to learn under occupation the real kind, the kind that included stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things when it mattered. And every year on the anniversary of the liberation, the whole station gathers in that same Plaza Euros, not for an execution this time, but for a celebration. Lily, growing up fast, always insists on telling the story herself now. Standing on a crate so everyone can see her, describing the night a quiet dock worker ran straight into a burning sector because he refused to let a 6-year-old girl die alone. She always ends it the same way, grinning ear to ear, looking straight at Ethan standing at the back of the crowd, trying and failing to look humble about it. And they thought they killed the story right there. She says every single time. They had no idea what was coming next. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do isn't winning the fight. It's simply refusing to walk away from someone who needs them a euros and trusting that everything else will follow.